Hey guys, tonight we are stepping onto a riverbank where the morning fog hangs thick and the reeds rustle in the damp breeze. You can almost feel your sandals squish in the mud as you wander toward the edge of a wide, slow-moving river. It looks calm enough now, but this river has soaked up centuries of whispers, legends, and outright shouting matches between empires. The Bach Dang River is not just water and silt. It is memory made liquid. And tonight, you're going to drift through those memories. Though, spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes if you actually tried to row a boat here during one of its famous battles. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake after all that, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love imagining this sleepy little community scattered across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle yourself at the water's edge, the sound of crickets competing with the splash of unseen fish. The year is hazy in your mind. Centuries fold over each other like damp parchment. You're not here for a timeline quiz. You're here to feel what it might have been like, to walk the muddy banks and to watch the tide creep in. You notice the reeds standing taller than you, green blades swaying in slow unison. Their whisper is a lullaby, and you realize how deceptively peaceful this place seems for a river that repeatedly turned into a watery battlefield. The river is wide, but not endless. Across the far side, faint mists blur the line between land and sky. Somewhere out there, fleets once gathered. For now, it's just you, the silence, and the knowledge that the water hides more than it reveals. Your feet sink slightly as you shuffle forward. The mud smells sharp, almost metallic, reminding you of iron nails or maybe blood. You shrug it off, deciding it's probably just the minerals. Besides, if you let your imagination run too far, you might spook yourself out of sleep, and that's not the goal here. The goal is to picture this river not as a static postcard, but as a stage where clever strategy outshone brute force, where wooden stakes toppled grand armadas, and where empires learned that sometimes size doesn't matter. And speaking of stakes, no, not the kind you grill at a weekend barbecue, the locals once lined the riverbed with sharpened poles. Imagine being the poor sailor ordered to row against the current, only to realize the tide was tricking you, luring you straight onto what was essentially a giant underwater fence made of pointy sticks. Historians still argue whether those stakes were arranged in perfect grids like some overachieving carpenter's dream, or if they were scattered more loosely. But either way, the result was shipwrecks galore. As you gaze out across the sluggish surface, you can almost hear the past layered in. Traders once floated by with silk, ceramics, and rice, chatting in accents from lands far beyond. Fishermen hauled in nets, muttering about river spirits that might steal their catch if they weren't careful. And soldiers, always soldiers, loomed somewhere near, preparing for the next incursion. The Bach Dang wasn't just scenery, it was a highway, a pantry, and a battlefield rolled into one. There's a quirky tidbit you can't ignore. Some old folk tales say that giant turtles blessed the river, offering protection to those defending the homeland. You glance at the murky water, half expecting a wise old reptile to poke its head up and nod at you like, "Don't worry, I've got this." No turtles tonight, just a ripple where a fish jumps, but the idea sticks with you. After all, even the mightiest fleet might hesitate if they thought a supernatural turtle was siding with the locals. The air is damp, and it curls around you like a blanket that's been left too long on the line. Somewhere a frog croaks, and you almost chuckle. You're about to slip into recounting massive naval encounters, and yet right now all you've got is a chorus of sleepy amphibians. Maybe that's the perfect way to begin, though, because to really appreciate the chaos of the battles, you first need to feel the calm that surrounded them. Think of this as the deep breath before the plunge. The villagers who lived here centuries ago probably felt this same deceptive calm. They would have gone about their chores, pounding rice, mending nets, bargaining over fish sauce, while rumours drifted in about foreign fleets. Picture yourself helping out, your hands raw from weaving baskets, your back aching as you haul water, your mind somewhere between dread and resignation. History isn't just the splashy moments of victory, it's the daily grind that frames them. As you sit with that thought, the horizon starts to shift in your mind's eye. You imagine sails blotting out the distance, armies you'll meet soon enough. But for this moment, you are just one sleepy traveller on the bank of a river, listening to the water sigh against the mud. The battles are coming, yes, but first let yourself sink into the mist, the mud, and the quiet pulse of the Bach Dang River. You shuffle forward along the bank, your sandals now more mud than leather, and you can almost sense the first stirrings of power that once gathered here. The Bach Dang is not just scenery, it is the stage where Vietnamese identity first began to sharpen itself like a blade. The delta around you stretches wide, veins of river splitting into streams and marshes, a whole watery labyrinth that doubles as both homeland and fortress. You stand there, imagining what it must have been like when the earliest Vietnamese kingdoms, small compared to the giants to their north, had to constantly remind the world, and maybe themselves, that they existed. The water glitters faintly, catching bits of sunlight that trickle through the mist, and you picture fishermen hauling their catches, then setting aside their nets because rumour has it an empire up north has been eyeing the region again. The song, the tang before them, and before that, the Han. The Bach Dang's shores have known a long parade of outsiders who thought, hey, wouldn't this make a nice province? As though local people were just decorative extras. You chuckle softly. You can almost hear a sarcastic voice muttering, yeah, sure, come take a swamp you don't understand. That'll end well. Mainstream historians tell us that these early polities, like the kingdom of Văn Lang, then Olac, later Nam Viet, and eventually the period under Chinese administration, shaped Vietnamese resilience. Centuries of occupation meant that by the time independence truly blossomed in the 10th century, people here had developed a deep playbook. Adapt, resist, and never forget the river is an ally. The quirk here is that while imperial officials sat in stone halls writing edicts, local villagers still swore by water spirits, kitchen gods, and the occasional talking turtle. One scholar even joked that Vietnam's first navy wasn't men with boats, but mythology itself, since every plan seemed to involve nature lending a sneaky hand. You glance upriver and the tide feels heavier, as if it remembers carrying more than fish and reeds. You imagine the early Vietnamese rulers, figures like the Ngo family, later the Ding and early Lê dynasties, standing at the water's edge, looking very regal, but also nervously wondering if their bamboo-armoured militias could really stand against heavily armed invaders. Historians still argue whether these early states had true centralised governments, or if they were just loose coalitions of ambitious warlords who occasionally remembered to send each other polite bamboo scrolls. Either way, the river was the glue holding them together. There's a quirky tidbit tucked into this watery history. Some chronicles claim that people would sink jars of rice wine at the river's bottom as offerings before major events. The idea was to win the river's favour, or maybe just to have an excuse for a party if the battle went well. You imagine stumbling across one of those jars today, fermented for over 1,000 years. Probably not a vintage you'd want to sip, unless you enjoy the taste of swamp and regret. The air shifts again, warmer now, carrying a faint sweetness of flowering plants along the banks. You catch yourself wondering what daily life looked like here. Picture a farmer in the delta, hunched over a paddy, feet sunk into mud, back aching under the sun. He dreams not of war, but of a good harvest. Yet when rumours spread of fleets approaching, he finds himself transformed into a river soldier, trading his plough for a spear. And maybe, as he rows down the current, he still carries mud between his toes, a reminder that he's fighting for the soil itself. That's the thing about identity here. It wasn't abstract. It was rice bowls filled or emptied, children carried or orphaned, fields planted or left fallow. The river provided, but it also tested, and every invasion was another exam. By the time the big showdowns at Bach Dang rolled around, the locals had been studying for centuries. You? You're just along for the ride, trying not to get your robe too muddy. The sun grows brighter in your mind's sky, and with it, the sense of tension. Because even though daily life kept humming, harvest festivals, ancestor rites, little jokes about whose buffalo was fatter, there was always that awareness that a fleet might appear on the horizon. It's like trying to nap with one eye open. Comfortable? Not really. But it trained everyone to be alert, adaptive, and stubbornly proud. So here you are, trudging along this muddy, reed-choked bank, and you realize the first currents of power weren't just about kings on thrones. They were about farmers, fishermen, traders, priests, and even those jars of rice wine sunk beneath the tide. They were about a people who looked at the wide river, then looked at themselves and thought, we can turn this into a weapon if we have to. And spoiler, they absolutely would. You pause at a bend in the river where the water curls lazily like a cat stretching in the sun. It's here that your imagination fills in something unexpected, rows of sharpened wooden stakes, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting like teeth in the mouth of some invisible beast. You can almost hear the creak of carpenters hauling massive logs, trimming them with iron tools, and then hammering them into the muddy riverbed. Each pole would be driven in at an angle, its tip hardened by fire, ready to punch through the hull of an unlucky warship. You crouch by the bank, brushing your fingers through the murky surface, and you wonder how many thousands of man-hours went to this strange defensive forest underwater. The idea itself feels brilliant in its simplicity. Why fight a naval power ship for ship when you can let the tide do the heavy lifting? At high tide, the stakes were invisible, just lurking shadows under the current. At low tide, they sprang up like jagged fangs. A fleet unfamiliar with the river's moods could be coaxed in at the wrong hour, and, well, imagine the sound of hulls splitting, followed by panicked shouting in languages you probably don't understand. Mainstream historians agree that the Vietnamese employed these traps during several battles, but they still debate the exact design. Were the stakes spaced neatly, in measured rows like soldiers at attention? Or were they scattered in a more chaotic pattern, forcing ships to zigzag clumsily? Some even suggest they might have been connected with chains, though evidence is sketchy at best. Either way, the principle remains. This was an ambush you could build with wood and patience, not cannons or endless wealth. You grin at a quirky tidbit floating up from the depths of folklore. Supposedly, villagers who helped plant the stakes sometimes left charms or small carvings on the poles, hoping to imbue them with spiritual power. One story claims a fisherman tied a fish skeleton to his stake, reasoning that if it had already claimed one life, it would claim another. Not exactly scientific warfare, but hey, when you're facing down professional armies with dragon-emblazoned sails, a little extra luck doesn't hurt. The air around you feels heavier as you picture the logistics. Imagine hauling these logs, sometimes thicker than your torso, down into sucking mud while mosquitoes treated you like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Your arms ache just thinking about it. And of course, this wasn't done on a lazy afternoon. Stakes had to be placed under secrecy, probably at night when the tide was low and enemy scouts less likely to notice. The whole operation would have looked like a strange midnight construction site. Torches flickering, muffled voices, the thud of mallets and the splash of mud flying everywhere. Not exactly glamorous, but essential. You stand straighter, looking at the river with new eyes. What once seemed peaceful now feels like a giant trap disguised as scenery. It's a reminder that geography itself can be weaponized if you're clever enough. The Bach Dang didn't need steel-plated warships. It needed patience, timing, and a deep intimacy with the tides. And tides, of course, are fickle. Historians still argue whether Vietnamese commanders timed their ambushes down to the exact moment or whether they just got lucky sometimes. The idea of Ngo Quinn or Trun Hung Dao standing at the bank with a pocket watch saying, "Wait, now!" is tempting but probably unrealistic. More likely, local fishermen who lived and breathed the river every day could predict the ebb and flow with uncanny precision. Imagine betting your entire country's freedom on the moon's gravitational pull. That's a lot of pressure for an orbiting rock. You chuckle, picturing yourself as one of those carpenters or fishermen. You'd probably be the one complaining the whole time, "Why couldn't we just build a big wall instead?" And your neighbour would glare and remind you that a wall doesn't stop ships, but stakes just might. You'd sigh, swat another mosquito, and keep hammering, because complaining never stopped an invasion. As you drift along the river in your thoughts, you start to notice how every splash of water, every gust of wind, carries a hint of the past. Somewhere beneath you, long-rotted stakes might still be embedded in the riverbed, silent fossils of resistance. They don't poke through the surface anymore, but they once decided the fate of empires. It's humbling to think that a piece of wood, sharpened by human hands and hidden in the mud, could topple ships carrying thousands of men. And so you keep walking, the reeds brushing against your sleeves, and the stakes remain vivid in your mind. They are the teeth of the river, the silent army lying in wait. Soon, you'll see how those teeth bit into the First Fleet, unlucky enough to underestimate this deceptively calm stretch of water. For now, though, you simply picture them gleaming under the tide, sharp and patient, like a trapdoor waiting to swing open. You shuffle a little farther along the muddy bank, and the air seems to thicken, as if even the atmosphere remembers what is about to happen. It is the year 938. You hear it whispered in the reeds, see it painted across the grey water, and sense it in the quickening beat of your own heart. Because now, the first great clash is about to unfold, Ngoquin versus the Southern Han. You imagine yourself standing on the bank, squinting through mist, trying to decide whether those dark shapes on the horizon are storm clouds or sails. Spoiler, they're sails, and they're headed straight for you. The Southern Han fleet comes heavy, packed with soldiers, crossbows and ambitions. This is not some pirate raid or stray fishing quarrel. This is a dynasty aiming to remind Vietnam who supposedly holds the leash. But here's the twist. You're not looking at a population that plans to roll over. You're looking at Ngoquin, a man who studied his river like a book and turned it into his fortress. Picture the scene. Villagers hauling supplies, farmers dropping ploughs to grab spears, women weaving ropes for the ships, children ferrying messages between camps. The whole countryside buzzes like a hive preparing for a storm. You too feel the adrenaline as you step into a boat, the wood rocking under your feet, the smell of tar and wet bamboo filling your nose. Above, the cries of gulls cut through the fog, almost mocking the fleets about to meet below. Mainstream historical fact. Ngoquin had recently seized power after the fall of the Cook clan and was determined to keep Vietnam from slipping back into Chinese domination. His rise was dramatic, part rebel, part visionary, and this battle, fought here at Bach Dang, would either crown him as a hero of independence or bury him in obscurity. Historians still argue whether he saw himself as founder of a dynasty or just a man with a really urgent problem to solve. Either way, he put everything on the line. As you gaze out, you imagine the Southern Han Admiral Lu Hongkao commanding dozens, if not hundreds, of ships. The river narrows, the tide rolls in, and the invaders believe they are pressing forward with overwhelming might. They see villages scattering, smaller Vietnamese boats pulling back, and they think, "Oh, this is easy. Just row faster." You almost want to whisper across the water, "Hey, maybe don't follow them too far." But arrogance sails faster than wisdom, and the enemy presses deeper. There's a quirky tidbit that sticks in your head. Some sources claim Ngoquin himself joked that the stakes hidden beneath the water would do more fighting than his soldiers. Imagine standing before your troops, delivering a pep talk that boils down to, "Relax, the lumber's got this." It sounds absurd, but it was also true. You grin at the thought of generals today trying that line. Not very confidence-inspiring, unless you've actually seen the river devour ships before. The battle itself begins with skirmishes, arrows whistling through fog, drums pounding like thunder, voices shouting across the water. You picture yourself rowing desperately, sweat stinging your eyes, the smell of burning pitch drifting in from a flaming ship nearby. The Southern Han fleet pushes forward, sure of their strength, while the Vietnamese pretend to retreat, luring them in. The current grows stronger under your boat, tugging you like an invisible rope toward a point you know well, the bed of wooden stakes waiting silently. Historians still debate the exact scale of the Southern Han fleet. Some chronicles insist on 800 vessels, others think the number more modest. Either way, the invaders weren't expecting the ground, or in this case the riverbed, to fight back. You glance over your shoulder and can almost see Ngoquin at the stern of his command boat, calm as stone, waiting for the tide to turn. Literally, and then, as if on cue, the water begins to drop. Slowly at first, like someone discreetly pulling away a carpet, then more insistently, revealing the jagged tops of the stakes. The enemy ships, massive and slow, crash against them. Wood against wood, but only one side is sharpened. Hulls split, soldiers tumble, the once proud fleet becomes a jumble of stuck, broken and sinking vessels. You grip the side of your imaginary boat, the river rocking beneath you, listening to the shrieks of men who thought themselves untouchable. The air fills with smoke and spray. Vietnamese soldiers surge forward in smaller, nimble craft, spears flashing, voices echoing in triumph. You find yourself swept into their ranks. Your arms trembling from the weight of a pike, your throat raw from shouting. You're exhausted, terrified and exhilarated all at once. Because here, on this river, a people have just turned the tide of history, literally and figuratively, by weaponizing mud, wood and patience. As the invaders falter, you notice something odd. Amid the chaos, some soldiers cling desperately to stakes rather than drown, which only makes them easier targets for Vietnamese fighters gliding past. It's brutal, yes, but in a strangely efficient way, like the river itself has become a set of extra hands, holding enemies still for the finishing blow. The sun lowers, painting everything gold, and the battle grinds to an end. You're soaked, your ears ringing, but you know you've witnessed something colossal. Ngo Quyen has not only defeated the Southern Han, but also carved out a declaration. Vietnam can and will stand on its own. You lean back in your boat, breathing hard, listening as the cries of battle fade into the softer rhythm of waves against wreckage. The reeds whisper again, only this time they sound like applause. The river looks different now. You drift along its surface, and what was once calm water now feels like a graveyard. Broken masts jut out at awkward angles, some charred, others snapped clean, like ribs poking through the skin of the river. Birds circle overhead, their cries sharp and curious, swooping down for scraps. You take a slow breath and realize you're standing in the aftermath. The tide has pulled away, and with it, the illusion of safety for the invaders. You squint, and there they are, the sharpened wooden stakes, rows upon rows of them, rising from the mud like skeletal trees. They glisten with slime and riverweed, but you know what they've done. Ships lie skewered, their hulls cracked open like clams. Sailcloth floats limply in the water, entangled with broken oars. For a moment, you can almost hear the echo of splintering wood and the sickening thud as vessels slammed against the forest of spikes. The scene is strangely quiet now, but not empty. Survivors cling desperately to debris, coughing, spitting out brackish water. Some stagger toward the banks, only to find villagers waiting with spears. You feel torn watching it unfold, pity for drowning men, but also a deep sense of inevitability. After all, they sailed here convinced of their superiority, and the river has humbled them. Mainstream historians remind us that this single victory in 938 ended centuries of Chinese attempts to directly administer Vietnam. Ngo Quyen didn't just win a battle. He declared independence with the tide as his notary. It's the reason he's often credited as the founding father of a truly autonomous Vietnamese state. Without this moment, the later dynasties, the Ding, Lê and Trun, might never have flourished. And yet, there's a quirky tidbit. Local folklore insists that after the battle, villagers collected the stakes and reused some of the wood to build communal houses. Imagine sitting under a roof beam during a wedding feast, sipping rice wine, and realizing the timber above your head once skewered an enemy battleship. Talk about multi-purpose recycling. You wade into the shallows, the mud pulling at your ankles, and you can smell the aftermath. It's a mixture of wet ash, fish, and something metallic that clings to the back of your throat. The reeds sway gently, as though indifferent to the carnage, whispering their eternal rhythm. You wonder how the locals must have felt, standing here in the twilight of that day, knowing they had turned back a dynasty. Relief? Triumph? Or maybe just exhaustion? Imagine rowing for hours, fighting for your life, then having to go home and still feed your buffalo. Historians still argue about the exact casualty numbers. Some chronicles describe catastrophic losses for the Southern Han, thousands of men drowned or cut down, their admiral killed in the melee. Others suggest the figures might have been exaggerated, more propaganda than precise record. But what's not debated is the symbolism. The river itself became the great equalizer. You didn't need steel armor when you had mud and stakes. You didn't need imperial fleets when you had the moon and tide. You picture yourself as a villager that night, gathered around a fire. Children clamber on your lap, asking breathlessly how the battle looked. You exaggerate, of course. Maybe you claim you saw a dragon rising from the water, or that the stakes glowed with divine fire. Who's going to argue with you? The kids gasp, eyes wide, and somewhere in their minds, the memory of the battle fuses with myth. The longer you gaze at the stakes rising from the water, the more surreal it feels. This was not just a fight, but a performance. An entire navy destroyed not in open combat, but in a carefully choreographed trap. You can't help but think of it as a play with 3 acts. Act 1, the baiting retreat. Act 2, the reveal of the stakes. Act 3, the collapse of an empire's pride. And you, lucky insomniac traveller, are watching the curtain fall. The tide creeps back in, covering the stakes again. Slowly, almost mercifully, the river swallows the jagged teeth, smoothing over the carnage as if to say, nothing happened here. But you know better. You've seen the river's hidden fangs, and you'll remember the way they tore through arrogance like parchment in a storm. You sit back, letting the rocking of an imaginary boat lull you. Victory has been claimed, independence declared, and yet the river remains the same, silent, patient, waiting. Because deep down, you suspect this won't be the last time foreign sails drift too far into its embrace. The smoke has drifted away, the wreckage slowly sinking, and you find yourself wandering among villagers who no longer carry fear but relief. The air has shifted. It's lighter now, as though the whole delta has exhaled at once. You step carefully through the mud, past men hauling in broken timbers, past women carrying baskets of food to the tired fighters, and you realize this is the quiet, unsung aftermath. No thunderous drums, no blaring horns, just the sound of a people reclaiming their river. You notice the children first. They scamper along the shore, treating abandoned enemy helmets like toys. One boy sticks his head into a dented bronze cap far too big for him, wobbling like a turtle, and the other kids laugh until they fall into the mud. You can't help but smile at the absurdity, a dynasty's symbol of power reduced to a playground prop. This, too, is history, half tragedy, half comedy. Mainstream historians point out that after the Battle of 9/38, Ngo Quyen established himself as king, marking the formal beginning of Vietnam's independence from direct Chinese rule. It's a neat line in the textbook. One leader, one victory, one new era. But here on the ground, what you see is far messier. Families searching for missing fathers, farmers hurrying to salvage the next planting season, elders muttering that the spirits must be appeased lest the river grow restless again. The story is independence, yes, but it is also the relentless churn of daily life. You overhear a quirky tidbit from a grey-haired fisherman who claims the river has a taste for arrogance. He swears that each time invaders came here puffed up with pride, the Bach Dang opened its muddy mouth and swallowed them whole. He gestures dramatically, waving a half-chewed sugarcane stalk as though it were evidence. You laugh quietly, though a part of you believes him. The villagers are resourceful. They salvage enemy planks for firewood, strip sails to patch roofs, and melt down bits of bronze for farming tools. Nothing goes to waste. The battle is folded back into the rhythm of life. You imagine a farmer walking behind his buffalo a few months later, guiding a plough tipped with iron once worn by a foreign soldier. There's a certain poetic justice in that, don't you think? As night falls, the river calms. Torches flicker on the banks and you hear the soft hum of prayers drifting across the water. Ancestor worship remains at the heart of everything, and now the ancestors are asked to witness this victory, to guard the freedom that has been won. Some villagers whisper thanks to Ngo Quyen, others whisper thanks to the river itself. You sit by the fire, watching smoke curl upward into the stars, and you realize that in moments like this, politics and spirituality blur. Historians still argue whether Ngo Quyen truly grasped the long-term significance of his victory. Did he believe he was founding a dynasty, or was he simply ensuring that tomorrow's sunrise belonged to his people rather than a foreign governor? Whatever the answer, the villagers around you don't care about philosophical legacies. They care that tonight they sleep under their own roofs, on their own land, without the shadow of foreign soldiers looming over them. There's a moment that stays with you. A young woman sits at the edge of the water, humming a lullaby to her infant. The melody is gentle, repetitive, like the rocking of a boat. The baby dozes, blissfully unaware that only hours earlier chaos reigned here. The woman gazes at the river with quiet defiance, as if daring it to challenge her child's right to grow up free. And you realize, this too is victory. You wander farther, hearing scraps of celebration. Someone passes you a bowl of rice wine that tastes sharp and smoky. Someone else presses a skewer of grilled fish into your hand, the flesh flaking, the smell irresistible. Even in the shadow of battle, life insists on continuing. You chew slowly, the salt on your tongue grounding you, the laughter around you rising like a tide of its own, and yet beneath the joy, a strange stillness lingers. The stakes are still out there, embedded in mud, silent and sharp beneath the surface. The villagers know the river may be called upon again. Tonight's feast is not eternal, it is borrowed time. But they'll take it, because tomorrow will bring more work, more planting, more repairing, and maybe someday, more battles. You finish your wine, lay back against a log, and let the stars blur above you. Independence has been claimed, freedom defended, and yet the river whispers that this was only the first of many tests. The Bach Dang will not stay quiet forever. For now, though, you close your eyes and listen to the lapping water, letting the sound blur into sleep. The river drifts forward in your imagination, and decades fold into centuries. The echoes of No Quin's victory soften, becoming legend, sung in lullabies and told in hushed fireside stories. But history rarely lets one triumph stand alone. You glance back at the water, and it feels restless again, as though anticipating another storm. And sure enough, about 100 years later, sails return to the horizon. This time, they belong to the Song dynasty. The Song are different from the Southern Han. They are wealthier, more organized, and more confident in their ability to command the seas. You sense their ambition even before their ships arrive. In the north, they've already built bustling cities, minted coins, and trained soldiers who march in neat rows with gleaming weapons. Now they glance south and think, surely this smaller neighbor can be tucked back into the empire. You roll your eyes, because if history has taught you anything so far, it's that underestimating the Bach Dang River is a terrible life choice. Still, the Song prepare carefully. They send scouts, diplomats, and generals, all with the same goal: secure control over the delta and reassert dominance. From your spot on the bank, you can imagine the nervous conversations in Hanoi, then called Dai La, later Thang Long. Courtiers murmur about how to resist such a polished threat, while villagers quietly sharpen bamboo stakes and pray to their ancestors. The air grows thick with rumour and dread. Mainstream historians tell us that in 981, Emperor Lei Huan, who had risen from general to ruler after the chaotic fall of the Ding dynasty, would become the face of resistance. He wasn't supposed to be king, at least not according to court gossip, but power has a way of slipping into the hands of those bold enough to grab it. And here he is, a farmer's son turned soldier, now preparing to defend the nation against one of the most formidable empires of the age. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some chronicles say Lei Huan consulted shamans before the campaign, asking them to read the river's omens. One story claims that a fisherman dreamed of a giant carp leaping upstream, a symbol of perseverance. The carp supposedly thrashed so violently in the dream that it splashed water into heaven itself, which the dream interpreters declared was a sign that the river would again rise up to repel invaders. You smile. Whether or not anyone believed it literally, it's a handy bit of PR for boosting morale. The Song don't come lightly. Their fleet is stocked with crossbowmen, supply ships, and war drums. Their soldiers wear lacquered armour that glints in the sunlight, and their banners flutter like a forest of silk. You imagine being on one of those ships, feeling invincible, convinced that no small kingdom could possibly resist such grandeur. Then you look back at the riverbank, where barefoot farmers stand with spears, and you remember what the tide is capable of. Historians still argue whether the Song's strategy was overambitious from the start. Some suggest they underestimated the logistical nightmare of operating in the humid delta. Others think their defeat lay not in planning, but in execution. Too much pride, not enough patience. Either way, you can feel the tension rising like the tide itself. You picture yourself walking through a Vietnamese camp on the eve of battle. The soldiers are fewer in number, their gear simpler, their bodies weary from long days in the fields. Yet their eyes burn with determination. They chew dried fish, sip bowls of thin porridge, and laugh at nervous jokes. One man boasts that he knows every twist of the river. Another swears his ancestor's ghost will steer his boat straight into glory. You chuckle softly at the bravado. You've heard it before, and you'll hear it again. Across the water, the song fleet beats its drums. The low thud carries across the river like a heartbeat amplified. You can feel it in your chest, steady and menacing. Yet on your side, the frogs croak louder, the reeds sway, and the villagers light incense sticks. The contrast is absurdly poetic. Steel and silk facing mud and bamboo. And you, perched between the two, sense that the river is about to write another chapter. The Bach Dang has already proven it has teeth. The stakes are waiting, perhaps sharpened anew, perhaps hidden in different bends of the current. The tide, impartial and inevitable, prepares to roll in and then slip out again. And once more, the fate of empires hangs on whether a foreign power can read the river as well as those who call it home. You settle into your boat, the wood creaking under your weight, and let the current pull you gently downstream. The air is sticky, the smell of smoke already drifting from distant cooking fires. You lean back, close your eyes, and listen to the sound of drums and croaking frogs overlapping in an odd duet. You know what's coming, the second great test of the Bach Dang, and you can't help but smile. Because the river has a way of reminding outsiders that arrogance always floats, until it doesn't. You wake to the sound of oars cutting the surface, long, steady strokes echoing across the river. It is 981 now, and the Song dynasty has finally pushed its fleet into the Bach Dang. You rub your eyes, still half dreaming of reeds and frogs, but the scene before you is anything but peaceful. The water teems with ships, hulking war junks bristling with soldiers, supply barges groaning under sacks of grain, and sleek escorts painted with the proud colours of the empire. You lean forward, gripping the side of your little boat, and you see the Vietnamese defenders preparing for what is to come. Emperor Lê Hoan stands at the centre of this moment, a figure as unlikely as he is determined. Once a general who married into power, now a ruler with everything to prove. He knows that if he falters here, Dai Ko Viet will be swallowed whole, just another province in the Song's ledger. Mainstream historians remind us that Lê Hoan adopted both diplomacy and military cunning. He famously sent envoys north, feigning weakness, even offering peace, only to use the delay to ready his forces. You picture him in a tent by the riverbank, ink-stained fingers tracing maps, listening as scouts describe the tide's rhythms. He is calm, deliberate, and perhaps a little theatrical. After all, in war, theatre can save lives. The clash unfolds as the Song fleet surges into the delta, its commanders confident in their numbers. Drums pound, arrows fly, and the air fills with the acrid tang of burning pitch. You duck instinctively as a volley whistles overhead, though in truth you are only a dreamer in this story. Still, you feel the chaos, men shouting in Mandarin, in Vietnamese, in the universal language of panic. And then the tide begins to turn, literally. Vietnamese boats, smaller and lighter, weave circles around the lumbering Song ships. Spears jab, ropes lash, and flaming bundles are tossed onto enemy decks. You see sailors frantically swatting at sparks while their vessels grind against each other in the narrowing channel. The Song had expected open water. Instead, they find themselves funneled into a trap of mud, reeds, and tides they do not understand. A quirky tidbit. Some chronicles claim the defenders released floating rafts loaded with straw dummies, dressed in patched clothing to look like extra soldiers. From a distance, in the smoke and confusion, the Song commanders, supposedly panicked, convinced reinforcements were arriving. You can almost laugh at the image, warriors wasting arrows on scarecrows bobbing along like drunken party guests. Historians still argue whether the Vietnamese repeated No Quin's exact tactic of hidden stakes in this battle, or whether they relied more on ambushes and guerrilla maneuvers. The chronicles are vague, and archaeology hasn't settled the question. But you sense that even if the stakes weren't used this time, the river itself remained the greatest ally, mud, tide, and narrow bends shaping the fight. The tide recedes further, and the Song fleet loses coherence. Ships run aground, others collide, and suddenly their superior numbers become a disadvantage. Lê Hoan seizes the moment. You imagine him rising in his command boat, voice carrying above the din, urging his men forward, and forward they go, fishermen wielding spears, farmers rowing as if the harvest itself depended on it, which, in a way, it does. From your boat you see the invaders faltering. Some leap into the water, only to be dragged down by armor too heavy to swim in. Others cling to overturned hulls, shouting for help that never comes. The Vietnamese press in tighter, their small craft darting like dragonflies. You almost feel bad for the Song soldiers, sweating under lacquered helmets, bewildered by a river that seems alive with hostility. Almost. By dusk, the water is thick with wreckage. Fires burn on stranded ships, sending plumes of smoke spiraling into the evening sky. You breathe it in, sharp, acrid, unforgettable. The Song fleet retreats in disarray, their campaign a humiliating failure. On the banks, villagers cheer, banging pots and gongs, sending the echoes of victory bouncing across the marshes. You step ashore and see Lei Huan among his men. He does not posture, he simply nods, acknowledging the hard work of those who rowed, fought, and risked everything. Tomorrow he will send messages proclaiming victory, but tonight he allows himself one deep breath of relief. And you share it with him. The frogs croak again, louder now, as if reclaiming their rightful soundtrack. The Bach Dang has defended itself a second time. And you? You can't shake the sense that the river enjoys this, testing outsiders, punishing arrogance, and rewarding those who know its moods. The fires from the battle have died down, and once again the Bach Dang wears its cloak of calm. But instead of focusing on emperors and admirals, your eyes drift to the people who make this river their daily stage. You wander through a riverside village, where the smell of grilled fish mingles with the smoke of oil lamps. The soldiers are still celebrating, but the quieter stories belong to the everyday folk who kept this place alive before, during, and after the clash. You pause to watch a blacksmith at work, hammering the salvaged iron of broken enemy weapons into farming tools. Sparks dance into the night like tiny fireworks, and you realize this is what victory looks like on the ground. Not grand speeches, but sharper hoes and sturdier ploughs. Meanwhile, a fisherman patches his net by lamplight, muttering about how the smoke scared off the good catch for weeks. His wife rolls her eyes, reminding him they're still alive to complain. You smile at their banter, because some things never change. Mainstream historians note that the Vietnamese armies of this era weren't professional standing forces like those of the Song. They were largely drawn from farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen who shouldered spears when called upon. That means the same man who rode into battle yesterday back at his rice paddy today, bent under the sun. You picture his calloused hands shifting effortlessly between plough and paddle, between feeding his family and defending his land. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some chronicles describe soldiers rubbing fish oil into their bamboo armor to make it slippery. The idea was that enemy blades would glance off like butter on a hot pan. You chuckle at the image of a warrior gleaming and smelling like a seafood market, but hey, practical problems call for creative solutions. You wander farther, and the details grow even more vivid. The oil lamps flicker with smoky light, fueled by fat rendered from fish or pigs. The houses, simple stilted structures, creak gently as children scamper up the ladders. Women weave mats out of reeds, their fingers moving so quickly you'd swear they've memorized the rhythm from the river itself. Someone passes you a bowl of sticky rice topped with sesame seeds, the nutty flavor grounding you back into the ordinary joys that survive even in times of war. Historians still argue whether these communities felt a deep sense of national identity at this stage, or whether they were simply loyal to their local lords and villages. Did a farmer in 981 really fight for Vietnam, or did he fight because his field was on the line? The debate continues, but standing here, you sense that identity doesn't need a flag or a proclamation. Sometimes it's enough to defend the mud between your toes and the water that fills your nets. As night deepens, you watch soldiers lounging on woven mats, their weapons stacked neatly nearby. Some laugh at crude jokes, others doze with mouths open, their snores blending with the frog chorus. You overhear one man boasting that he felled 3 enemies with a single spear thrust, only for his friend to remind him he actually spent most of the fight stuck in the reeds. The teasing rolls into laughter, warm and unpolished, a reminder that even warriors are just people with muddy feet. There's a tender moment, too. You see a mother handing her son a small carved amulet, worn smooth by years of touch. She tells him it belonged to his grandfather, who once fought on the same river. The boy clutches it, eyes wide, as if he's just been given the keys to bravery itself. The amulet glints faintly in the firelight, a quiet link between generations bound by the Bach Dang's waters. You lean back against a wooden post, the night air thick with humidity. Crickets chirp, children yawn, and somewhere upriver a drum sounds faintly, perhaps a patrol, perhaps just practice. You realize that life on this river is a rhythm. Fight, mend, feast, plant, repeat. And through it all, the people remain stubbornly themselves, resourceful, humorous, and perhaps a little sarcastic. You close your eyes and let the village noise wash over you, the hiss of oil lamps, the croak of frogs, the slurp of soup from wooden bowls. This is the heartbeat of the Bach Dang, quieter than war drums, but no less powerful. Because without these ordinary lives, there would be no extraordinary victories. The laughter of the villagers fades and the river shifts once more. You blink and the calendar has leapt forward. The Song dynasty is a memory, its banners long gone from the horizon, but the Bach Dang is never left in peace for too long. This time the shadow is darker, heavier. You can almost hear the distant thunder of hooves even though you stand beside water, not steppe. The Mongols have entered the story, and they do not arrive quietly. You tilt your head back and picture their empire stretching across half the known world. Horsemen who had galloped from the frozen forests of Russia to the hot sands of Persia. They've broken armies, crushed cities, and toppled dynasties. And now, under the Yuan dynasty, they look southward at Vietnam. To them, this land is just another square to be claimed on their vast imperial chessboard. To you, standing ankle-deep in the riverbank mud, it feels more like a nightmare approaching. Mainstream historians tell us that the Mongols launched 3 major invasions of Dai Viet during the 13th century. The first 2, in 1258 and 1285, were fierce but ultimately unsuccessful. The third, in 1288, would culminate here, on the Bach Dang. Already the pattern is familiar, outsiders underestimating this river and its people. Still, the Mongols bring something different, confidence built on global conquest. You sense the tension building like a drumbeat that will not stop. You wander through a Vietnamese camp in your mind's eye. This time the soldiers are hardened by years of resistance. They've faced Mongol cavalry before and survived, which is no small boast. Yet the threat of this new fleet still hangs heavy. The men sharpen spears by torchlight, their armour patched and worn, their boats tied with ropes rough from use. In the corner a monk chants softly, his voice a counterpoint to the steady rasp of whetstones. The air smells of sweat, incense and river mud. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Mongol horses were shipped south by boat, but many of them struggled in the humid climate. Chronicles note that these famously hardy steppe animals fared poorly in swampy terrain, developing sores on their hooves and refusing to eat strange local grasses. Imagine being a fearsome cavalryman reduced to babysitting a sulking horse who refuses dinner. Not quite the unstoppable image the Mongols preferred. The river itself seems to hum with anticipation. You can almost see the ghostly outlines of stakes being prepared again, planted in secret beneath the water. This time, though, the plan is even grander. Trun Hung Dao, the brilliant commander of the Trun dynasty, is orchestrating every detail. He knows the Mongols will press their fleet forward, swollen with pride, convinced that sheer numbers guarantee victory. And he knows the Bach Dang is waiting to prove them wrong. Historians still argue whether the Mongols fully grasped the danger of this river before entering it. Some suggest they had intelligence about the stakes but underestimated their impact. Others think they walked in blind, lured by what looked like a retreat. Either way, the debate adds to the mystique. Was this defeat inevitable, or did overconfidence doom them? You don't have the answer, but the suspense curls in your stomach like a knot. You step into an imaginary boat, drifting alongside villagers who have transformed into soldiers yet again. Their faces are weary but resolute. One man chews a piece of sugarcane, joking that he'll use it as a weapon if he has to. Another swears he saw a giant turtle rise from the depths last night, a sign of divine favour. You smile softly at their mix of humour and faith. They've seen invaders come and go, and they're ready to test the river's fangs once more. In the distance, you glimpse the Mongol fleet, Towering ships, sails stretched taut, oars flashing in rhythm. The sound of their war drums rolls like thunder across the water, so deep you feel it in your ribs. They look unstoppable, a tide of wood and steel. Yet beneath the surface, the real tide is shifting, waiting for its cue. You exhale slowly, gripping the edge of your boat. This is not the reckless arrogance of the Southern Han or the polished pride of the Song. This is something heavier, the weight of an empire that believes it owns the world. And yet, you know how the Bach Dang responds to arrogance. The stakes are planted, the tide will fall, and soon the river will bare its teeth again. The air grows thick, heavy with smoke from campfires and the scent of damp reeds. You drift further downstream, and the scene sharpens into focus. It is early 1288, and all eyes are on the man who carries the weight of survival, Trun Hung Dao. His name has already become a whisper of reassurance among villagers and a curse in the mouths of invaders. You picture him standing beneath a rough canvas awning, maps spread out before him, a lamp casting long shadows on his stern face. He doesn't need to shout. His authority radiates in calm instructions, like the slow rise of the tide. Around you, the camp is alive with restless preparation. Soldiers mend nets, sharpen stakes, and whisper prayers. You catch the murmur of old stories, tales of Ngo Quyen's victory centuries earlier and of Lei Huan's triumph 100 years after that. The younger men nod, reassured that their river has always been a shield. The older veterans, their hair streaked with grey, smile grimly. They've seen enough battles to know that shields sometimes crack. Mainstream historians remind us that by this third Mongol invasion, Dai Viet had already endured devastation. Towns were burned, fields trampled and families uprooted. The Mongols had forced the court to retreat before, and the scars were still fresh. Trun Hung Dao knew he couldn't simply outmuscle the invaders. He would need patience, cunning, and the river's help. You glance at him again in your imagination. He seems less like a general and more like a river spirit himself, poised to bend the water to his will. A quirky tidbit drifts into your ear. Some chronicles claim Trun Hung Dao issued a handbook of military strategy to his officers, written in plain, almost fatherly language. It was part manual, part pep talk, reminding them that unity and discipline would outlast brute force. One line supposedly urged them to think of the country as their family home. If the enemy broke in, how could they not fight with everything they had? You can almost hear him reciting it in a low voice, and the men nodding solemnly as though being reminded of household chores. Only the stakes were life and death. You wander deeper into the camp. A group of soldiers sits cross-legged, oiling bamboo bows. Another group practices rowing in rhythm, their arms pumping as they chant a steady beat. The sound carries over the marshes, blending with the croak of frogs and the buzz of insects. You close your eyes, and for a moment it feels like the entire land is breathing in sync, preparing for one immense exhale of defiance. Historians still argue whether the Mongols truly believed this campaign would succeed, or whether it was a desperate attempt to save face after previous failures. Some say the Yuan court expected an easy submission, imagining the Vietnamese as exhausted, weakened, and ready to yield. Others argue the Mongols had learned to fear Trun Hung Dao and hoped sheer numbers would overwhelm him. Standing here on the bank, you sense both arrogance and anxiety in the approaching fleet. Back in the camp, life continues in oddly ordinary ways. Women boil pots of rice gruel, stirring slowly with wooden paddles. Children chase each other between tents, giggling, oblivious to the dread hanging in the air. You picture one soldier sitting quietly with his family, plucking at a dan bow, the single-stringed instrument filling the night with a wavering, haunting note. The music is soft, almost hypnotic, and you realize it carries both sorrow and hope in equal measure. You can't help but notice the details. The glint of sweat on brows despite the evening cool, the mosquitoes buzzing at ears, the hushed conversations about whether the moon will favor them tomorrow. Someone jokes about crocodiles patrolling the river, half in jest, half in hope. You smile at the absurdity, imagining an armored crocodile joining the ambush. But then again, stranger things have been believed on this river. The night deepens, and you see Trun Hung Dao walking silently among his men. He doesn't speak much, just places a hand on a shoulder, adjusts a spear, nods at a tightened rope. His presence alone steadies them. You trail behind him invisible, feeling the calm authority radiate outward like ripples. Above you, the stars blur behind thin clouds. The river laps at its banks with a patient rhythm. Everything is in place. The stakes, the boats, the men, the will. The Mongols are coming, their sails fat with confidence, but they will find a river that has been preparing for centuries. You breathe in the humid night air, thick with anticipation, and you realize you're standing at the threshold of one of the greatest naval ambushes in history. The quiet is almost unbearable. You wait as they wait for the moment when the trap will spring. The mist clings low on the water and your boat rocks gently, as if the river itself is holding its breath. Then, in the distance, you hear it, the steady drumbeat of the Mongol fleet. Boom, boom, boom. It grows louder until it feels like your chest is echoing the rhythm. Out of the fog, sails unfurl like great grey wings. The Yuan fleet surges forward, confident, enormous, their banners fluttering, their oars slicing the water in perfect rhythm. You almost admire the spectacle until you remember, this is arrogance wearing silk. On the Vietnamese side, boats scatter as if panicked, drawing the enemy further into the channel. You see soldiers rowing with exaggerated haste, glancing over their shoulders as if terrified. It's a performance, a retreat rehearsed so many times that it almost convinces you. You want to stand up and shout, "Don't fall for it." But of course the Mongols, like every invader before them, think they've already won. Mainstream historians agree on the essentials. Trần Hưng Đạo lured the Mongol fleet deep into the Bach Dang, timing the maneuver with the turning tide. The stakes were already hidden below, sharpened and waiting. The Vietnamese withdrew upstream, baiting the enemy into the trap. By midday, the Mongols pressed confidently forward, their massive ships filling the river like logs in a jam. They thought they were pursuing victory. They were sailing into a cage. There's a quirky tidbit in the chronicles. Supposedly, some of the smaller Vietnamese boats were disguised with bundles of reeds, so they looked like floating debris until they suddenly sprang to life with spears and fire. Imagine the shock of a Mongol sailor leaning over the rail to poke at what he thought was driftwood, only for that driftwood to stab back. It's equal parts terrifying and hilarious. As the tide begins to recede, the water level drops inch by inch. Slowly, the tops of the stakes emerge, first just shadows beneath the surface, then jagged fangs gleaming in the sun. One by one, the Mongol ships grind to a halt, their hulls punctured and pinned. You hear the crunch of splintering timbers, the guttural shouts of men trying to row harder, faster, anywhere, but there is no way out. The river has turned against them. Historians still argue whether the Vietnamese fired the first assault while the Mongols were already stuck, or whether they waited until panic spread before closing in. Either way, the result is the same. Small Vietnamese boats, nimble and swift, swarm around the immobilized giants. Arrows whistle, spears jab, and pots of burning pitch arc through the air, shattering on decks. Flames leap up, black smoke curling into the pale sky. You cough, even though it's only imagination, the smoke so thick it stings your eyes. From the corner of your eye you see one Mongol ship tilt, water pouring through a jagged hole in its hull. Soldiers scramble, some jumping overboard, their armor dragging them down like anchors. Others cling to the stakes themselves, turning the river into a grotesque jungle gym of desperation. Vietnamese fighters dart past, striking quickly before vanishing again into the maze of reeds. The noise is overwhelming. Drums, screams, splashes, the crack of wood, all blending into a chaotic symphony. Yet within it, you catch a strange beauty. The rhythm of the tide, the choreography of boats weaving in and out, the precision of a plan executed flawlessly. You realize this isn't just battle, it's performance art on a grand scale, with the river as stage and the stakes as props. And in the midst of it all, you glimpse Trần Hưng Đạo command boat, steady amid the chaos. He raises his arm, and the soldiers cheer, their voices rolling like thunder. The sight steadies you too. He doesn't need to say anything, the river is already speaking for him. The Mongols thrash, but the trap is total. Ship after ship shatters, burns or sinks. The fleet that once carried imperial pride is reduced to wreckage and wailing. You lean back against the side of your boat, heart pounding, watching as history pivots on the tide. For the third time in as many centuries, the Bach Dang has devoured an empire. The tide continues to fall, exposing more stakes, trapping more ships. The sun dips lower, turning the smoke golden. You feel exhausted just from watching, but exhilarated too. This is the moment the river has been waiting for, the teeth bared, the jaws closed. The trap has sprung. The trap is fully sprung now, and the river has turned into a graveyard in motion. Everywhere you look, chaos seethes. Flames licking at sails, shattered oars drifting downstream, and men flailing in the muddy water. The Mongol fleet, once a floating wall of power, is collapsing in slow motion, like a sandcastle meeting the tide. You sit low in your boat, the smoke stinging your eyes, but you cannot look away. On one ship, soldiers claw at ropes, trying desperately to free themselves from stakes that hold their hull like giant claws. Another vessel groans, tilts, and with a final crack slides under, taking dozens of armoured men with it. Their shouts bubble into silence, and you shiver at how quickly pride can sink. Mainstream historians tell us that the Mongols suffered catastrophic losses here, hundreds of ships, thousands of men. Their admiral, Omar, barely escaped with his life, forced to abandon the fleet and flee north. The Vietnamese seized victory not just with muscle but with strategy, patience, deception, and timing. This was not brute strength against brute strength, it was wit against weight, and wit won. You glance toward the shore and see Vietnamese soldiers surging forward, their smaller boats darting between the immobilized giants. Spears flash, arrows thud, and voices rise in triumphant chants. You can almost hear them calling out, "The river fights with us." For once the muddy water seems alive, dragging enemies down, holding them fast. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some accounts claim that Vietnamese fighters tied flaming bundles of reeds to trained cormorants, sending the birds swooping across enemy decks with fire trailing behind them. Whether that actually happened or not, you grin at the absurd mental picture, a squadron of very annoyed birds accidentally inventing aerial warfare centuries early. Even if apocryphal, the story captures the inventiveness of this fight. Historians still argue over how many Mongol troops actually drowned here. Some chronicles give impossibly high numbers, painting the scene as an apocalyptic disaster for the Yuan. Others caution that medieval record-keepers loved to inflate figures for dramatic effect. But standing here in the smoke, you realize numbers hardly matter. The scale is overwhelming, no matter the tally. The sight of so many ships breaking, so many men scattering, is enough to etch itself into eternity. The noise crescendos and then shifts, less the roar of battle now, more the wailing of defeat. You watch as messengers scramble toward Omar's remaining ships, shouting frantic orders. Some commanders refuse to abandon their stranded fleets and are cut down where they stand. Others beg for mercy, tossing down weapons, clinging to the hope that surrender might save them. And on the banks, Trần Hùng Dao's men drag in prisoners, binding them with ropes made of twisted reeds. The air smells of wet ash and riverweed. Your throat burns from smoke, but the adrenaline in your veins keeps you awake. You think of the Mongol Empire, stretching from Korea to Hungary, brought to its knees by sharpened stakes in one Vietnamese river. Pride does not float forever. One ship explodes in a spray of sparks as its powder stores ignite, and for a moment the sky glows red. Pieces of wood rain down, hissing as they hit the water. Soldiers dive overboard, splashing wildly, but the river is merciless. The tide has fallen too far, escape routes are gone. You grip your boat tightly, whispering to yourself, "It's over. They're finished." And then, almost suddenly, the fighting quiets. The last Mongol vessels pull back, limping, battered, their sails torn and their decks littered with wounded men. The once proud fleet retreats in tatters, and the silence that follows is heavier than the noise before. You sit very still, listening only to the crackle of fires and the slow, gurgling sound of water filling broken hulls. The Bach Dang has spoken again. It has swallowed arrogance and spat out ruin. You look around at the wreckage, at the prisoners kneeling on the banks, at the victorious yet weary soldiers. The battle is done, but the memory will linger forever. The smoke clears slowly, leaving behind a wide river littered with ghosts. You drift downstream, the current tugging at broken timbers and shattered masts. The screams and splashes are fading, replaced by the low hum of wind through reeds and the creak of boats being pulled back to shore. Victory is certain now, but the weight of what just happened presses down heavier than the humid air. On the banks, soldiers stack confiscated weapons, their hands blackened with soot. Villagers arrive with baskets of rice and jugs of water, tending to the weary fighters. The scene feels almost ordinary in its rhythm, just another day's work, except for the ruins of an empire scattered across the tide. You stand among them, trying to make sense of the scale. An invasion fleet shattered not by sheer strength, but by cunning and patience. Mainstream historians explain that this final defeat broke the Mongols' ambitions in Vietnam once and for all. After 3 failed invasions, the Yuan court accepted that the cost outweighed the gain. Vietnam remained free, its independence preserved not by walls or fortresses, but by the river itself. That's the official summary, neat and tidy. But here you feel the messy details, the mud under fingernails, the exhaustion etched on faces, the quiet prayers whispered into the night. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some say that after the battle, the victorious soldiers carved poems into rocks along the Bach Dang, praising the river as a divine ally. Imagine stumbling across one of those carvings centuries later, the words half faded but still legible, like a sleepy whisper from the past. We fought. The river saved us. Whether true or not, you can almost picture the scene, soldiers leaning on spears, chuckling through their exhaustion as they scratch lines of verse. Historians still argue whether the Mongol defeat was due more to Vietnamese strategy or to the environment itself. Was it Trần Hung Dao's brilliance, or was it the mud and tide that doomed the fleet? You smile at the debate because the answer is probably both. Human wit sharpened the stakes, but only the river could deliver the final blow. It's a partnership, man and nature conspiring together, like old friends who've rehearsed this trick for centuries. You look up and imagine the long shadow of this victory stretching forward. Poets will sing of it, chroniclers will copy it onto scrolls, and children will fall asleep to tales of the river that ate empires. For the Mongols it becomes a scar, an embarrassment rarely discussed in glowing imperial records. For the Vietnamese it becomes a touchstone of resilience, proof that no invader, no matter how vast, could tame this land. Even centuries later, you can almost hear echoes of those poems in the rustle of reeds. Students will recite them in classrooms, elders will mutter them during festivals, and tourists will one day read translations on stone markers. The river has become both battlefield and memory, its waters flowing not just with silt but with story. The soldiers around you are quieter now. Their laughter has softened, replaced with the slow, deliberate movements of people who know the fight is over. Some tend to the wounded, others begin dismantling enemy gear for reuse. A group of boys drag a captured banner through the mud, laughing, their childish glee contrasting sharply with the grim work of their elders. Life insists on pushing forward. You step back into your boat, letting it drift, the current guiding you downstream. The banks blur into a soft green haze, the water glimmers with floating embers, and overhead the sky begins to shift toward dusk. The war drums are gone. The only rhythm now is the lapping of waves against wood. The long shadows stretch across the water, and you realize this victory is more than an ending. It is a promise. A reminder that even the mightiest can fall, that even the quietest river can roar when provoked. The Bach Dang carries that promise forward, century after century, like a secret folded into its tides. The river is quiet now, as if the water itself has settled into a long sigh. You drift slowly downstream, the current tugging you away from the wreckage, away from the smoke, away from the clamour of victory. The Bach Dang has spoken 3 times across 3 centuries, and each time it has swallowed arrogance whole. Now, in the silence that follows, you sense the river is at rest. The banks blur in the fading light. Villagers move like shadows, carrying baskets, tending to fires, sweeping mud from the thresholds of stilt houses. Children splash at the edge of the water, their laughter delicate, almost hesitant, as though they know the river might still be listening. You lean back, letting your shoulders drop, and the sounds begin to weave together into a gentle lull. Frogs croaking, reeds rustling, oars knocking against wooden boats. Mainstream historians often summarize the Bach Dang battles as turning points that secured Vietnamese independence. They are right, of course, but standing here, the truth feels larger and softer at once. It's not just strategy, not just sharpened stakes or brilliant commanders. It is generations of ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, carpenters, who turned their knowledge of mud, tide and bamboo into a weapon more enduring than steel. There's a quirky detail you can't shake. Some local legends say the river still holds the spirits of drowned invaders, restless and muttering beneath the surface. Fishermen tell stories of hearing foreign voices in the night, carried on the current like whispers from another world. Whether or not you believe it, the idea lingers, like a shiver in the warm evening air. Historians still argue about the exact number of ships, the precise strategies, the casualty counts. But you realize those debates miss the essence. The river doesn't care about numbers. It remembers rhythms. The steady fall of the tide, the creak of wood against hidden stakes, the laughter of children running along its banks after the danger has passed. You close your eyes and let the images swirl together. Ngo Quinn watching the Southern Han collapse in 938, Lei Huan outmaneuvering the Song in 981, Trun Hung Dao springing the grandest trap in 1288. 3 moments, stitched together by the same stretch of water. 3 declarations, all whispered by the river. You cannot break us. And now the Bach Dang flows on, carrying silt, carrying stories, carrying you into the hush of night. Wind down, approx 300 words. The river slows to a crawl in your imagination, and so does your breath. Each inhale is the tide coming in, each exhale the tide slipping away. The water is calm now, polished like glass, reflecting the first stars above. You picture them scattered across the sky like lanterns set afloat, glowing faintly, guiding you into rest. All around you, the noise of battle has vanished. The smoke has drifted away, leaving only the soft chorus of crickets and frogs. The reeds bow gently in the night breeze, brushing one another with the sound of paper turning. You hear a faint splash, maybe a fish, maybe only your own heartbeat echoing in the water. The river keeps its secrets, but it offers you peace. Let the images dissolve now. The broken ships sink deeper into memory, their jagged masts swallowed by mud. The commanders, the soldiers, even the horses fade into shadow, their stories carried forward only by the flowing current. What remains is the rhythm, the patient, eternal rhythm of water against shore. You sink further into that rhythm, your body heavier, your thoughts slower. Imagine lying on the bank, the grass cool beneath you, the stars wheeling slowly overhead. Somewhere far off, a lullaby drifts across the night, a tune without words, gentle and unhurried. You don't need to hold on to details anymore, they've all been written into the river's song. With each breath you drift further from the noise of the day, further from the weight of stories, further into quiet. The river carries you, steady and safe, into sleep.